Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that's the sound of rock cracking. You've got Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. That's webtalkradio.net. Last week's show, we dealt with a gratitude, an attitude of gratitude for those who went in on D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, 75th anniversary. We did that show last week. And this week, we're going to continue with, as President Donald Trump did go to Normandy, did go to Omaha Beach, and he gave a rousing speech, an important speech, and so says one of the best, if not the best, he's given during his presidency. Even those who oppose President Trump were commenting on what a good speech it was, and it was. So we're going to play some of his words on the second half of the show, and we're going to talk about D-Day again on this show, because there's so much that was hanging on that day, and so much was at risk, and so many people died, so many soldiers died and were wounded. And there are a couple of things I wanted to pick up on from my last week's show, and if you haven't listened to last week's show, please go back and listen to that. I mentioned there a friend of mine that I grew up with all 12 years of school. He's still a friend today, but his father died a couple years ago, J.T. Street, and his father was J.T. Street, and I talked about how he had gone to plant explosives, and that may have been wrong what J.T. Street did the night before D-Day. During the evening, he volunteered, and they went where the boys of Pointe, and that was a speech that President Reagan had given about them on the 40th anniversary of D-Day during President Reagan's presidency. And I'll tell you what, in a minute I'll play a little bit of President Reagan's speech, because it was an outstanding speech. But what J.T. Street had done is go in and they drilled holes in the rock to help. So when the boys got there in an invasion, it's 225 Army Rangers, but they would have places to start their climb up the cliff, sky-high cliffs, to take some guns out. And J.T. Street went there, volunteered at night, and during the night got there, drilled the holes, got back, and then he was on the landing craft, and he went to Omaha Beach, one of the worst beaches, where just so many people died. And you remember, if you go back and listen to the show, he was the one that noticed people, the Navy guys who were directing the landing craft weren't getting close enough to the coast, and they were letting guys out too soon, and they were drowning with all their jumping in with their backpack, all their packs and everything, and they were sinking. So he was telling everybody, take your backpacks off, get rid of everything, and so they'd have a chance to survive. And of course he did survive. And it was a horrible day for those who were in the midst of the hell that went on the beach there in Omaha and during the invasion. So I wanted to point that out. There's a couple more things I told you last week in the show about. I had 7 uncles on my dad's side, 3 uncles on my mom's side during World War II. And there's, of course, each of them, my dad had many cousins, and they were in the battle. But there's one, Earl Montgomery, was his first cousin, and he's since, of course, passed away. But I got to talk to him some about, he went in not on D-Day, but D-Day plus 2 or 3, it was a couple days afterwards. And he said that he never will forget. And he showed me a little vial of sand that he got off the beach there, because he said he knew what he had witnessed, where he was getting off the ship and going on to the beaches was something that was unlike anything that had ever happened in the world before in military history, in world history. Because he said the immense armada, that the supplies, that these things had been for 2 or 3 years, America had been producing all this equipment in the factories, and they'd been storing it and got it by ship over to England, and they just vast warehouses of equipment and supplies and tanks and trucks and everything imaginable was sitting there ready to go. And so, of course, that didn't go in on Invasion Day. They tried to get some tanks in there. It didn't work on Omaha and other places. But now that they had a beachhead, and that's why D-Day was so important. That was phase one, to get the beachhead. But to go inward, they had to have all this equipment. And Earl Montgomery's telling me about, he said it was, you couldn't describe it. The eye could not find what the eye could see. The mouth could not bring words to say. The massive armada of ships that were unloading, and lines of tanks and trucks, and all kind of supply trucks, and all kind of and men just coming out by the tens of thousands, and that's what D-Day was about, to get a beachhead, and they succeeded in getting the beachhead, and then the thrust to go against the Nazi regime and all the battle-hardened veterans, and the way they put in defensive stops all through France to protect the Nazi regime. But this massive army had been unloading because of what the men did on D-Day. And that's where I just wanted to, I left that out last week, but the way I wish I had recorded him, I didn't. But this is what he told me. He says they came in the sand, and to walk through the sand over the beach where these men had fought just a couple of days before. And he said the stench of death was everywhere. He said the army had done everything to clean the battlefield. They didn't want these young 18, 19, 20-year-old young men seeing dead bodies. So he said you knew there were tarps, and under those tarps you knew there were bodies, but they had cleaned it up so you wouldn't see dead bodies, because they didn't want the young soldiers being having fear. They wanted to see the clean. They said they tried to sanitize that battlefield. They said the stench of death was everywhere. He said you could still smell the burnt flesh when you went across some of the places where, the concrete bunkers that the Nazis had, and they'd gone in and they'd used flamethrowers to help get rid of the Germans that were manning the concrete bunkers. And he said the smell of burnt flesh was still singed into that concrete, and you could smell it as you walked by them. And the blackened part of the concrete where the flamethrowers went. And he said it was something that was almost, he said it was unbelievable to think of what went on in the battle. But he said more than that was seeing the effect of that because of what those men did who fought on D-Day. Now you had this massive armada of equipment from the very best, from factories all around America that were producing these war vehicles, the Jeeps, all the different, even landing craft and makeshift ports, and all these things that had to come about and had come in because the beachhead was taken. And he said he knew in all of history nothing like this had ever happened. And and probably won't ever happen again the way it was, the way war has evolved with missiles and laser guided missiles, and you probably won't ever see anything like that again, and hopefully not. The world shouldn't have that kind of battle again. We hope not. But the sheer majestic, I don't know if that's the word he used, but he just the massive amount, said all the way down the beach as far as one eye could see, from one way and the other way. There was a never-ending line of ships unloading men, supplies, tanks, trucks, jeeps, and he said, fuel tanks. It was being unloaded. All this had been meticulously planned. Of course, everything didn't go as planned, but everything got to the beach after the D-Day heroes secured the beachhead. And so I didn't tell you about that last week, and I meant to, but that's my cousin Earl Montgomery's eyewitness report to me. Of course, he went on in battle and fought across France and into Germany, and he made it home alive. But the fact that he said he took a vial of that sand, he had to have some sand of what that meant for him to see that sight, to smell the smells, and he said that was such an imprint in his mind that he could never get it out of his mind. And when he shared it with me, he said he could close his eyes and he could smell that. He could look at that sand. He said he'd open up that vial sometimes, and he said maybe it was his imagination, but he could smell. He could close his eyes, and he could be right there on that beach right then, still smelling the stench of death, seeing the massive armada unloading there of the men and machines ready to fight Hitler and the Nazis. So I'll share that with you. I told you I was going to play a little clip. I do want to play that because J.T. Street was there drilling holes before the invasion so that the boys of Pointe there would climb the cliffs. And this is what President Reagan's talking about on the 40th anniversary of D-Day when he was president.
We're here to mark that day in history when the Allied armies joined in battle to reclaim this continent to liberty. For 4 long years, much of Europe had been under a terrible shadow. Free nations had fallen. Jews cried out in the camps. Millions cried out for liberation. Europe was enslaved, and the world prayed for its rescue. Here in Normandy, the rescue began. Here the Allies stood and fought against tyranny in a giant undertaking unparalleled in human history. We stand on a lonely, windswept point on the northern shore of France. The air is soft, but 40 years ago at this moment, the air was dense with smoke and the cries of men, and the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire and the roar of cannon. At dawn on the morning of the 6th of June, 1944, 225 Rangers jumped off the British landing craft and ran to the bottom of these cliffs. Their mission was one of the most difficult and daring of the invasion: to climb these sheer and desolate cliffs and take out the enemy guns. The Allies had been told that some of the mightiest of these guns were here, and they would be trained on the beaches to stop the Allied advance. The Rangers looked up and saw the enemy soldiers at the edge of the cliffs shooting down at them with machine guns and throwing grenades, and the American Rangers began to climb. They shot rope ladders over the face of these cliffs and began to pull themselves up. When one Ranger fell, another would take his place. When one rope was cut, a Ranger would grab another and begin his climb again. They climbed, shot back, and held their footing. Soon, one by one, the Rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. 225 came here. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 could still bear arms. And behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. These are the boys of Pointe.
And those boys of Pointe got there because men like J.T. Street had to help drill some holes to get them started, and then got back on, went back to England, then got on landing craft and headed to Omaha Beach. Thank God for heroes, for young men that did not shrink from their duty of putting country first over their lives even. And that's why we live free today. That's why we live free today. Couldn't say enough about President Reagan. Oh yes, he could give a speech. And in a little bit, on the second half of the show, we're going to listen to what President Donald Trump had to say. We're going to listen to some of his words. But let me remind you right now, you're listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. That's webtalkradio.net. We're glad you're listening to us. Again, we have interesting guests time to time, clips. You'll hear things here on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics you won't hear just anywhere else. We bring out some points and things that we want you to hear and think they're important to know, and we're glad you're listening to us. And we invite you to tell your friends and neighbors and send out links to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We put up our show once a week. It's up there all week. Of course, the archives, we invite you to go back to the archives, and you can look at the headlines and pick out some of the shows and listen to them. And what we do here at Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics is just not repeated anywhere else. There's not a format just like what we do. And I want you to understand that the reason we do this, we put this together because we believe in more liberty, more freedom, and we work to get America that way. And sometimes and we got started back in the Tea Party movement. We realize, and people say, where's the Tea Party? We did a show, sort of the anniversary of the Tea Party. We talked about some where the Tea Party went. But a lot of people got caught up in wanting perfection. I'm not looking for perfection because I'm not perfect. There's not anybody that's perfect. And what I want you to understand is we are on a journey. And we got to keep moving forward. And we'll have some losses during the Obama administration. There's so many things that were just completely going in the wrong direction. And some people, I still have some friends who can't stand Donald Trump, conservative friends. These never-Trumpers, they're still out there. But I have to tell them, are we not moving in the right direction? Yes, we are. Is everything perfect? No, it isn't. But we have got to move forward and keep taking steps forward for more freedom and more liberty, and that includes economically, it includes constitutionally, it includes local government, state government, and national government. And I believe we are in that position where we're moving forward toward more freedom and more liberty. I want to keep that up, and that's why we're doing Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. And that brings us right into where we are as we're talking about the D-Day invasion and what it means to world history. And that was one thing that was pointed out when Donald J. Trump, President Trump, went into France. Now, there was some controversy. The NBC reporter had tweeted that Donald Trump, President Trump, held up the whole entire ceremony so that he could have a Fox News interview with Laura Ingraham. And we've played clips of her show before, and I think she has a great show, great insight. But Laura Ingraham did not hold it up. And this later, I believe, the NBC reporter, after she tweeted this, and everybody was blaming Donald Trump, then she came back and said, no, they were waiting on President Macron for the French president, because his helicopter was late, okay? But that's how the president could not even get good press in Europe, and people would hammer him. But the good thing, most, even liberal commentators said President Trump had a good speech on about D-Day, and he did. And I want you to hear it all. You can go to the right there where we introduced the show, where it's written. I got a link to his entire speech. I'll put a link up for President Reagan's speech from the 40th anniversary. But listen to those. They're important speeches, both of them. And right now, let me go ahead and let's just play this clip from it's about 3 or 4 minutes how President Trump started the speech. But go back and listen to the whole thing. But I got a few things I want to say after you listen to this. Good to have you on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics.
President Macron, Mrs. Macron, and the people of France, to the First Lady of the United States and members of the United States Congress, to distinguished guests, veterans, and my fellow Americans, we are gathered here on freedom's altar, on these shores, on these bluffs, on this day 75 years ago. 10,000 men shed their blood and thousands sacrificed their lives for their brothers, for their countries, and for the survival of liberty. Today we remember those who fell, and we honor all who fought right here in Normandy. They won back this ground for civilization to more than 170 veterans of the Second World War who join us today. You are among the very greatest Americans who will ever live. You are the pride of our nation. You are the glory of our republic. And we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Here with you are over 60 veterans who landed on D-Day. Our debt to you is everlasting. Today we express our undying gratitude. When you were young, these men enlisted their lives in a great crusade, one of the greatest of all times. Their mission is the story of an epic battle and the ferocious eternal struggle between good and evil. On the 6th of June, 1944, they joined a liberation force of awesome power and breathtaking scale. After months of planning, the Allies had chosen this ancient coastline to mount their campaign to vanquish the wicked tyranny of the Nazi Empire from the face of the earth. The battle began in the skies above us. In those first tense midnight hours, 1,000 aircraft roared overhead with 17,000 Allied airborne troops preparing to leap into the darkness beyond these trees. Then came dawn. The enemy who had occupied these heights saw the largest naval armada in the history of the world. Just a few miles offshore were 7,000 vessels bearing 130,000 warriors. They were the citizens of free and independent nations, united by their duty to their compatriots into millions yet unborn. There were the British, whose nobility and fortitude saw them through the worst of Dunkirk and the London Blitz. The full violence of Nazi fury was no match for the full grandeur of British pride. Thank you. There were the Canadians, whose robust sense of honor and loyalty compelled them to take up arms alongside Britain from the very, very beginning. There were the fighting Poles, the tough Norwegians, and the intrepid Aussies. There were the gallant French commandos, soon to be met by thousands of their brave countrymen ready to write a new chapter in the long history of French valor. And finally, there were the Americans. They came from the farms of a vast heartland, the streets of glowing cities, and the forges of mighty industrial towns. Before the war, many had never ventured beyond their own community. Now they had come to offer their lives half a world from home. This beach, codenamed Omaha, was defended by the Nazis with monstrous firepower, thousands and thousands of mines and spikes driven into the sand so deeply. It was here that tens of thousands of the Americans came. The GIs who boarded the landing craft that morning knew that they carried on their shoulders not just the pack of a soldier, but the fate of the world.
You heard President Trump. They carried not just a pack on their shoulder, but the weight of the world. Go back to what I told you about my cousin who was in World War II, Earl Montgomery, when he was telling me about the sights and sounds and smells that he had when he came onto the beach 2 or 3 days after the June the 6th D-Day. And it was entirely the weight of the world. These men had to make a beachhead. They had to succeed. They had to fulfill their mission. And so many did and gave their lives to fulfill that mission. It was a horrible day in death and injuries, wounded, and yet it was victorious for the Allies, victorious for the American soldiers who had ingenuity when they had to, like I told you about J.T. Street, saying, dump your gear, get the backpacks off, we got to stay alive, because he was seeing people sink to the bottom and dying before they even got to shoot at the Nazis. And that, my friend, was just the beginning as they hit the beachhead. And you can watch Saving Private Ryan, the movie Steven Spielberg did, and see the death, the chaos, and that was Omaha Beach and the beachhead. And yet the American soldiers found a way to secure victory, but at a great cost. But that's what I wanted to tell you, what Earl Montgomery's memory was when he came in the second and third day after D-Day. The massive amount of machines and men, the soldiers who were the invasion to rid Europe of the Nazi tyranny. The beachhead was secured. The war really began to knock Hitler completely out and free an enslaved continent. So thank you to the men and women who endured that time. But it also reflects the reason why I played back the tape of FDR at Gettysburg last week on the 75th anniversary of Gettysburg. We have this ability that goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, where men and women who want to live free are willing to fight and put country over their lives. And thank you to the men and women and serving in the military today, my niece, my nephew. There's so many people that we all have family members who are serving. And thank God for each one of you. God bless you. Thank you for carrying on your tradition of keeping America free and putting your lives on the line. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. We'll see you next week. We'll get back into some politics next week on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. See you then.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit DocHolliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.